Oh, well,
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to get started because I actually have to leave a little early. And then I'm going to pass the baton to Gary. So as many of you know, we've been canoeing the mountains. And when I was reading the chapters to get ready for this, it occurred to me that the book is really very timely in the sense that, as Gary had said, we're walking through COVID land and all the things you see on TV from the media and everywhere we're all in this together. And Lewis and Clark were all in it together. They weren't doing it by themselves, and that's really the main theme. Go to the next slide, Gary. So in the chapter 12, there's a story about Hal and Gus. And it's a really interesting story that illustrates some of the points that are important as we move forward. So both Hal and Gus are in their 80s, and typically they would be stay-at-home folks who may or may not connect through Zoom, depending upon how technologically savvy they are. But Hal is not able to see, he's blind, and Gus is paralyzed from military service from his waist down, so he cannot walk. But Hal and Gus managed to get to church before the COVID crisis. They got to church together, because Hal would push Gus and Gus would give him directions, and that's how they would get to church together. So they were very dependent on one another, but it was a pretty cool way that they worked together because, they had formed a bond and a relationship, and they managed to get to church together, and everybody was happy to see them. I don't know if they went as quickly as these two guys are going, but that was Hal and Gus. And sort of the message, next slide, Gary, is stay calm and enact relationally. So it's really telling us that we need to relate to one another if we're going to move forward together. Stay calm in this crisis. Stay calm in the midst of whatever crisis we're dealing with or whatever chaos. But it's really important that we're interacting relationally. And you'll see a little bit later, but when the vestry had a retreat in February, we met with Father Alex from the bishop's office, and he talked about going out into the community and getting to know your community and building relationships. And that's really what it's all about, is that we're a community, a church community, and that the way that we move forward is that we get to know one another. And I think it fits really well with the entire Invite, Welcome, Connect initiative as well. Next slide, Gary. So Todd Bolsinger, who wrote the book, talks a lot about in this chapter how he was a part of an initiative where he met with several people throughout the Presbyterian Assembly, where his church is, to come up with some new processes. And they met for months, and he was in touch with lots of people, and then he presented it at the assembly, and nobody that he had worked on it with supported him publicly. And so the initiative died. And it's not that important what the initiative was, but the initiative died. And that's where he starts talking about how sometimes when you have big change coming up, you can expect sabotage. But he also tells a great story that really struck me about how Todd Bolsinger, how his father was always had a butter knife handy, hence the picture. And he talked about how he could fix anything with a butter knife, because that butter knife could be a screwdriver, it could be a way to unlatch things, kind of like my husband uses duct tape. And I'm sure you all have something similar that you always count on when you need to fix something that comes in handy. And so the message from the butter knife story that he was trying to relay is, next slide, Gary, that we need to innovate and renovate with whatever tools we have at our disposal. So when we think about these times with the virus, everybody's really jumped in to do whatever we can. And I know Dee Dee's been at the forefront of a lot of the technological stuff, and Gary, and I don't know all the people behind the scenes, but everybody's done what they can. I mean, Marge playing her harmonica for taps at the end of the service today, Dee Dee and Sarah and Connie and Stephen, everyone that's contributed to the music has figured out ways to make our service happen, despite the fact that we're not all in the same building. And I think for some of us, it's been more connecting than when we sat in church, actually. So you do what you can with the tools you have at your disposal. So as we move forward in this time of change, we need to think about everything we have available to us to move forward. He also talks about when you're working towards change, there's multiple teams, not to think of just one person or thinking of just the vestry, figuring it all out and then delivering it to the congregation. There are multiple teams of people that we can count on to be part of this change process. And it's sort of symbolic. We talk about the allies, the people that will help us to move forward, the confidants, people that we can talk to and share our fears and our frustrations and everything that's going on. And of course, there's always the opponents, because not a lot of people like change. And then there's the senior authorities, the people we go to that we know have the expertise that we need to move forward. And of course, there's the dissenters, the naysayers, the people who say, oh, we're not going to do that, or we've always tried that and it's not going to work. And then there's the casualties, unfortunately, the people who may decide, you know what, I'm not up for this at all, and I'm not going to be able to do it. So we're just going to leave, or we won't be a part of moving this forward. So there's lots of things to consider as we move forward with change. And Gary, I have to leave, so can I hand it over to you now? Sorry. Are you okay with that, or you want me to go quickly through the last?
No, I think I can take
okay.
it. Anyway,
so I'm sorry I didn't get into involving you more, but as we progress through the slides, Gary will ask more questions and you'll get a chance to participate more. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. One of the things that Bolsinger points out, because of course the whole book is based on the Lewis and Clark thing, is that it was never Lewis and Clark. It was always Lewis and Clark, kind of one word, Lewis and Clark. And that is a suggestion that there isn't a solo leader in any of this. He points out in terms of what Susie just said, that yes, there was a senior authority, that was Thomas Jefferson. But Thomas Jefferson needed Lewis and Clark to do the job. And Lewis and Clark needed Sacagawea or Sacagawea, or however you want to pronounce it, as well as the whole core of discovery. It was a team effort to move from the eastern side of the Louisiana Purchase all the way through it to make it to the Pacific Ocean. So it was a team effort, leadership in uncharted territory, and this is one of the points that he wants to make over and over again, is never a solo operation. So and one of the other things, and we'll talk about this just a little bit more in a few minutes, it was mentioned briefly last week, but what was really key in a lot of the chapters from last week is the importance of a mission and understanding the mission and the mission statement. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but that is so key, is that everybody recognizes that the mission is paramount. And so when we talk about allies, those are people who are committed to the mission, regardless. When we talk about confidence, they care about the leader. They're not so committed to the mission, but they are committed to the leadership. And so these things begin to fit together. But the question is, what's the mission? And is everybody kind of on board with that? So many of you remember remember this when it was real time. Some of you may just remember it from when it was the Tom Hanks movie. But Houston, we've had a problem, and so this is in many respects, of course, heading into uncharted territory. Here is this team outside in a capsule thousands and thousands of miles away from Earth. And then there is another team on the inside in Houston, trying to resolve this particular problem. And so there's a change. How do we deal with this change? And so the church, like Apollo 13, has to adjust and twist. And Houston had to work on this, as did the astronauts. We had to figure out a way, on the fly, so to speak, how to solve this problem. And of course, from the movie, you may remember this line. If you saw it, I don't care what anything was designed to do. I care what it can do. And if you haven't seen the film, go get it. It's a great example of teamwork and innovation. The flight director, or the mission director, tells all of the engineers and everybody says, come in and bring in all of this stuff that they have available to them in the cabin. You know, they can't go outside and get anything. So what do they have available? People come in with cardboard boxes and dump them on the desk, and there are duct tape, and there's hoses and tubing and switches and all sorts of stuff. And the guys on the ground start cobbling together what they might be able to put together on the spaceship, or on the rock, the capsule, to get them back. And it didn't make any difference what it was designed to do. What made a difference is what it could do. And you know, that's where we are in many ways. I don't think Zoom was ever designed to be something set up for public worship, but it became something that it could do. We've got a lot of other examples of all of that. So as we begin to chart our way forward, not only into the 21st century, which is what Bolsinger was really addressing, but as we chart our way forward through Zoom, through COVID land and Zoom and all of those kinds of things, you know, there's this question about what can it do? And again, this what can it do is what can it do in support of the mission? One of the things that that Bolsinger points out, and Canon Alex was really keen on too, and he challenged the vestry to do this this exercise. And it wasn't an exercise that the vestry was challenged to do on behalf of the church. It was an exercise that the vestry was challenged to do for the vestry. He's a big Bolsinger and Canon Alex, big proponents of the 8-word mission statement. And which was really great. It comes out of an organization called the Malago Foundation. And when they give money away. And one of the things they ask those who are requesting grants to do is come up with an 8-word mission statement that begins with a verb, explains its target population, and an outcome that implies something to measure, all in 8 words or less. When we think about a lot of corporate mission statements, they are not 8 words or less. But he gives some examples. Save kids' lives in Uganda. 5 words. Rehabilitate coral reefs in the Western Pacific. 7 words. Very measurable things that can be done, easy to understand, and very, very concrete. So the concrete thing in Apollo 13, of course, was get those guys back. And so everything was around that. I don't know what an 8-word mission statement would have looked like for the folks on the ground, but it would be, you know, using what we have, we get them back. Although that's more than eight words. So, you know, it's not about what things are designed to do. It's about what they can't do, what they can do. So we really need to think carefully in terms of moving ahead about this. I'm going to stop for a second and just see what kind of responses, thoughts, questions folks have at this point of anything that we've done for the last 20 minutes. Stunned silence. Nope. Okay.
Gary, this is Mark. I have a thought, and it's a quote from Richard Rohr. You know, I like him so much.
Mm-hmm.
But he wrote, "Resurrection is another word for change, particularly positive change, which we tend to see only in the long run. In the short run, it often just looks like death." So while not trying to sound too Pollyannic about this pandemic thing, we're certainly discovering new ways of doing old things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And Susie, Susie mentioned that earlier about, we're finding out that, people are able to connect via Zoom in ways that is different and maybe in some respects a little more fulfilling than sitting behind somebody in a pew. Rather than seeing the back of the head, we're seeing faces. We're able to put faces to names, which even if we wear name tags, wasn't always the case. We've got people on Sunday morning that were there from all three services. And so names and faces are being put together. So yeah, I think we are learning from that thing that may look like death, that there may be some resurrection to it. I think we're just learning stuff all the time. Some of it we're being forced to learn. I think a lot of us may have had the idea that, golly, it would be great to do something online, but we don't have any time, or I don't know how to do it. And now that's what we're being forced to do. And the learnings that we're getting will outlast anything that has to do with the building. And so, you're absolutely right. Rohr is absolutely right. What looks like death may presage a resurrection. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah. How do you deal with all those different personalities that Susie mentioned? And are the people aware that they are doing this?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I think we'll figure it out as we go. Bolsinger suggests that leaders, and the book was aimed at leadership in general, but Bolsinger suggests that, and I think that this is true for anyone in a lot of different ways, is first identify your ally, identify an ally for whatever it is that you want to do, and identify a confidant, so that you've got somebody who can support, who can be with you as you charge ahead into the unknown future, and will be with you, on mission. But also make sure that you've got somebody who can sort of say, there, it's okay, I'm here for you, to be your support system, regardless of the mission. They care more about us than what we are doing. And so Bolsinger challenges us to look for those kinds of folks. He talks about the figures of authority as well, and so in the sense of, if he were just talking to me as the priest, those figures in authority would be the vestry and or the bishop's office. How would I work with either one of them in terms of fulfilling the mission? So that's, they are there and certainly need to be worked with, but they aren't as hands-on for the immediate fulfilling of the mission as some of the rest of the groups, the allies and the confidants. He points out that you need to listen to the voices of dissent, because they help you figure out what needs to be tweaked, what needs to be changed or altered, that may be helpful as you move forward. You just need to recognize that there are always going to be opponents. As Susie pointed out, there are always going to be those folks who say, nope, 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 They may not, sort of flee as the casualties do, but they'll be grumpy. And you need to recognize, and you need to pay attention to them, and help them, work with them, be in contact with them, to make sure that everyone is committed to the mission. Because it may be that what you are doing is absolutely in line with the mission. It's just a way of fulfilling that mission that is being disagreed with. So for example, just to use one off the top of my head, the mission is to grow the church. All right. And everybody's on board. We're going to grow the church. And one of the design features of growing the church is we're going to project everything on the front of the church wall. And some people are going to say, nope, never going to happen. So the question, the conversation then becomes, how do we grow the church? That's the mission. And here is a way to do that. So it's focusing everything back. As I said before, the mission is paramount, or as I've preached on before, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And it's so easy to sort of go off in tangents. So Bolsinger points out over and over again how to bring people back to that mission and why it's so critical to have everybody sort of understand what that mission is. And 8 words is great. If we could do that, that would be cool, because it's easily remembered. Becky Beal Moore, you've unmuted. Is there something you wanted to pop in on?
I just thought I'd share for the good of the cause. If it's helpful, great. If not, you can just ignore my next 60 seconds of talking. I've been doing a lot of studying, as many of you may remember, and I put my background onto it. I'm getting my master's in organizational leadership, of which this is a gigantic part of what I'm studying. And there's lots of different ways to go about this, and we can talk about Bolsinger's approach of adaptive leadership later. But I think the mission statement to me is used in a lot of different contexts. I think what a lot of academics are focusing on, kind of coalescing around, is that vision is what you expect the future state to be, and the mission is your purpose or your business, so to speak, what you do. But the strategies around that, which might be an example would be like using the prayer book and having to balance between the prayer book and all sorts of other books. Strategies are how you go about doing it, and objectives are how you measure that, right? So I think an 8-word mission statement is great, but I think it kind of combines this notion of what you want to become and also what your reason for being is. And I think we just need to be clear what we're trying to say, because I think when we combine things all in one short phrase almost, sometimes meaning gets buried or can be misconstrued because we're not being explicit. So while I'm not a fan of really long-winded, paragraph-long mission statements, there is some benefit to having a few more words in there to be more concrete, so you know what strategies actually do fit in under what your meaning is contained in that mission statement. So that may be too academic, and I acknowledge that, but sometimes I have a hard time when people want to distill things too short of a phrase that then it's not clear what you do with it next because it's too concise.
Great, thank you. Again, I'm not saying that Good Shepherd needs to come up with an 8-word mission statement. What I find so compelling about it is kind of just pick up what Becky was saying. Sometimes we get mission statements that are so long that nobody can remember them, and they're hard to implement. The Salvation Armies, I just love theirs, which is doing the most good. And you can riff off that in so many different ways. Doing the most what? The good, how, what? So it's short and it's memorable. And so you can sort of think about it in a lot of different ways. But
Gary, I might disagree with you though. It's not clear on what they're about though. So it's not clear to the community or even the members within their organization. It's not clear what I would respectfully disagree with you. I like it. I think it's pithy, but it's not clear what they're about. So in that respect, from an academic perspective, it's not a clear mission statement. It could be anything that they're part of, and they should be to the eight-word mission statement camp. It's not clear. It doesn't really have a direction to even. Anyway, that would be my take on that.
Yeah. Again, I'm not arguing for it. What I really think, and I think this is where Bolsinger would come down, regardless of the length of the mission statement, is get everybody on board in agreement with it so that you can point to it as you move forward. That this is what we do as this organization, as this church, as we move forward. You know, so I think that that's really the key.
I have two things I'd like to add. Obviously it's Irma, and I love coming to church still with my nightgown and robe on, and you don't see my picture because of that. But I have two comments. One is on the length. I want to bring up the Declaration of Independence. The longest sentence in the Declaration of Independence is 122 words. Multiple clauses, very clear. And the clause that says that we are created with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Americans know. So it's the precise word. Maybe good isn't precise enough. That's my saying on that. Second thing is, when I was confirmed or I reaffirmed in the Episcopal Church from the Presbyterian Church, a word we talked about was the mystery and the acceptance of mystery. And I've been thinking about this a great deal because of the number of my acquaintances who have mates who are involved in and accept conspiracy theories. And they were all science, engineers or science. And I thought, I think their problem is they don't accept the possibility of mystery. I had never thought about the mystery of the virgin birth. I just accepted it. It was what I was taught and I accepted it. But obviously it is a mystery why so many people have to say, well, she really wasn't a virgin. And we get all these excuses, conspiracy theories going. Or the mystery of the resurrection. It's a mystery. I'm going to finish this with a trip my younger grandson and I were on last spring about this time. And we were up on the west side of Rocky Mountain National, and it was evening. And we were headed up the park a little bit. And Talon said, Nana, do you believe in ghosts? And I said, yes, because I believe in the Holy Ghost, Talon. I believe that the Holy Ghost is with us at all times. And it opened up a discussion about the presence of the Spirit, the non-physical presence of the Spirit. And I think that is one of our key missions, is to bring the Spirit, the non-physical Spirit, into wherever we are. Zoom, a house, somebody's backyard, wherever. It's the Spirit. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Irma. Mary, did you have input?
I was going to say I did. What I enjoyed about this book was in the discussion of the mission was that, you know, you would have people perhaps start to grumble and whatever, and you would have, you know, you would listen to them. And in the end, you would try to go with them. But even if you couldn't, you could go back to the mission statement and say, okay, you know, here is our mission. We're agreed upon it. Can you come along? Because what you're suggesting is not part of what we would do. And I think that makes it a lot easier to deal with those who won't come along, and also to bring more people with you than you would otherwise.
Yeah. I think one of the things, or I won't say I think, one of the things that he points out in the section last week and brings up again is that when you're moving through this uncharted territory, you need to stay calm. And then he says, stay connected. And then the third thing was enact relationally, and that was kind of where we started this morning, was with Gus and Hal, was enacting relationally, that one would push and the other one would guide. But through all of these challenges, as you pointed out, Mary, all of these challenges, one of the challenges with the opponents and the dissenters and the casualties is to stay connected, rather than to immediately write them off as they're some wacko or they're never going to come along, but to stay connected despite. And I think that that's in some respects the hardest work in all of this. Ellen, you look like you wanted to bop in here.
Well, I was thinking about how Ken and Alex wanted us to do that 8-word mission statement, and how really very hard it was. But I felt like one of the goals of that was to get us out of the weeds of how we're going to do that mission, because there's so many different ways to do the things that we do. And I think that he wanted us to not get locked down to a certain way to do something, but really to think about what we were doing. And then outside of the mission statement, then we figure out how we best do it. And how you might do it is different than how I might do it. And that doesn't mean either one of us is wrong. And it doesn't mean we can't do it both ways. So.
Yeah, that distinction between what and how.
Right.
Yeah, thanks.
Gary, I was just going to say, I really liked Ellen's distinction about the purpose of the 8-word mission statement. I'm not on vestry, so I wasn't privy to that conversation with Ken and Alex. I think people get caught up on the strategy or the how, and this goes back to what I really liked in Bolsinger's text, that he said, besides the relational part, mission trumps everything, even denominational situations. And I think getting back, the main thing is the main thing. Mm-hmm. I think that part of the mission statement, that element of it is a really great guiding force. And I really liked how Ellen's distinction between what I would characterize as the mission statement and the strategies, and not getting confused between the what and the how we're going to do it. So I think that, thanks, that was a really great definition for me.
Ellen, remind me, since you're still there, I hope, is that there were 3 parts to that. Wasn't there the why, the what, and the how?
I believe that he did have us do the why, the what, and the how.
Yeah.
They were all separate.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was the implementation thing, and that's the how.
Right.
And I think there was the what, which was the middle piece, and the why, which was the sort of that thing that's internal to us. It could be the vision piece, as Becky was talking about. But clearly, we can, speaking of getting bogged down in the weeds, we can move forward through this. But the key point has been, for a lot of these chapters, is that mission piece is critical. So I'm going to move some slides along. I did not develop these slides, so I'm not always clear exactly what Susie's idea was in putting them together. We didn't have a lot of time to chat about this. She had an emergency she had to leave for. So Mary, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right. It looked like you just unmuted, so that was.
Well, I'll go back to muting.
No. Be that's it. Just there we go. So I'm trying to remember what this slide was about, and I think it had to do with about getting involved with our neighborhoods. And as doesn't mean that we're going to evangelize everybody or everywhere all the time, but we need to know our community. And she talks about, she suggested that music with a mission was part of this, and the community looks forward to that, and it is who we are. And they appreciate that chance to come together. And so as we move into uncharted territory, what are those things that are part of our mission that is really there, grounded in our community? Then let's see, what's...
That could also be the view from the balcony.
Yeah, say more about that.
Just that sometimes we get so caught up in what we're doing down on the main floor that we forget what the big picture is.
Okay.
As far as being involved with community, um, I think it's certainly true of me, and I think it's true of most people that I know at the church. We have a wide variety of friends who don't belong to Good Shepherd and may never belong. But, in fact, I've got a few that will never belong to any church. But we are representing, if you will, Christianity in the sense that it's the way. And in that process, we treat them as Christians would. And in that process, we may find that we get involved with them and need the church perhaps to back us up, to be our confidant as we continue to live the way in our everyday life. And I think that whether we grow the church by actually bringing such folks in through the door, or whether we grow the church by simply positively representing our faith and being of use to other people, needs to be, thought of. And maybe part of our mission isn't bringing people through the door, but rather it is being Christians, so that people can see what it is.
I think, thanks, Mary. I think Bolsinger would sort of say, yeah, you got it. Because bringing people in the door, I think he would equate with sort of the Christendom model of our history, is that, we are it and we bring people into it. And he's so big on the issue of being missional and going out. And I think that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I'm hearing you talk about, is this not so much bringing people in, but us going out. And I kind of alluded to that at the end of the sermon, just my sermon, saying that, the church will be born anew, and that's not having to do with the building, not to say that the building won't be there and the building won't be, a support for us. It may be that place where we gather with all of our all of our confidants. But it's really that launching pad for going into the community. We've been talking. This has nothing to do with so much with Bolsing, but it's instructive from my standpoint. We've been talking about how to increase our the strength of our Wi-Fi at the church. Because we're getting increased usage by people who are coming in, and especially now with what we're doing, all we're doing, and people down in the basement, and everybody on phones all the time, the Wi-Fi is really not very good. But what we've learned is that we've got as good a Wi-Fi as we can get, because we're in the middle of a residential area, and they haven't run business lines to us yet. And so what does that say about our neighborhood is, and our neighbors? We're a long ways away from sort of corporate neighbors. We're right in the middle of residential neighbors. And even how we deal with Wi-Fi and internet is sort of an indicator of that land, or that territory in which we find ourselves. And what does that mean? It's a fascinating struggle for us. Again, going back to what I mentioned a little bit earlier, Bolsinger stresses over and over again that you have to stay calm and you have to stay connected. And that's just it's really hard. When your neighbors that you really, really like are on the opposite side of the political divide, it's really, really hard to stay calm and connected with them. But it's similarly, it's the same kind of thing with us, or with a congregation or any organization moving forward. And this is where I think it's so critical to have the main thing be the main thing be the main thing. There are political consultants who talk about how to have conversations with people with whom you differ, and it's to find a piece that you would both agree on, and then figure out why you're so different in the middle of all of the other pieces, rather than starting on where you're different. But that's just so hard, and we just struggle with that. Why did she have this great picture? Just a second. Oh, she says we must have dogged determination to work through these changes and stay focused on our goal. And there we go. Just a great visual for that. But again, the critical issue is, what is the goal? What is the mission? What is our goal? And it's been fascinating as I've talked with our new transition officer and with Canon Alex, that certainly when I was hired, the goal was to move through the 3 sort of phases of the priest in charge process, and the end of the visioning process, we'd have a new vision, and then COVID hit. And the goal is very different now, although there might be some overlap. And so what does that look like? What does the goal look like? Especially when the world has shifted in ways we had no way of expecting 3 months ago. No way of expecting. What does that look like? But once we settle on that, and that's one of the things that we're working on, is we need to be clear on what that goal is, and then to chase that multicolored tennis ball through the water with that dogged determination. What a great picture. Another great picture, and this is where she says that leading, or Bolsinger points it out, leading through change is a process. And all of those other penguins here are all of those other groups in the organization that need to be led. And so leading allies is different than leading opponents. Being engaged as leaders with the authority figures is different than being engaged with the dissenters. Being engaged with the confidants is different. But that lead penguin has to help all of those others get across that gap, and do it in ways that supports the mission. I think the mission of the penguins is pretty clear: procreate. The survival of the species, the survival of that colony, and how are we going to get there? All of these things are what we're about. So again, leading change is a process, and it will be sabotaged. This is where Bolsinger sort of ends these 2 chapters, is this whole question of sabotage. And he points out, we think about sabotage in sort of a military way, that we're going to send agents in to stop our enemies from being able to do it by hitting them at some weak place or something like that. He thinks he puts it in a different way, and working on the riffing off the work of Edwin Friedman and family systems theory, he points out that sabotage is normal, and what it is somebody unconsciously supporting the status quo or protecting the system. So it's people don't like change for the most part. Organizations really don't like change. We get what we set the system to do. That's the product that it perpetuates. And so when we start to shift it a little bit, there are going to be forces that want to keep us in the status quo, and those forces are the saboteurs. And it's perfectly normal, he would argue. And as he said over and over again, the critical piece is to stay connected, stay calm and stay connected, and keep the main thing. Or as he points out, talks about it in these chapters, what are red zone decisions and what are blue zone decisions. And he distinguishes between the two of them. Red zone decisions are basically emotionally based. This freaks me out. I don't like it. I was made to eat that when I grew up. I will not do it again. You know, all of these things are really red zone decisions. They're coming out of people's anxieties, people's fears, all of those sorts of things. And he charges us to move to blue zone decisions, where rather than talking about anxieties, we're talking about values. And so, you know, the questions that are blue zone decision questions are, what is it that furthers the mission? And if we're arguing, what principles are at stake here? Or what values are we expressing in the terms of this discussion? A really hard one is, what pain must we endure? You know, and I'm just thinking about where we are in COVID land, and both as Good Shepherd, but as the church in general, you know, what values would we be expressing if we said, oh, we're opening the building tomorrow? Or, you know, that's a different value. What principles are at stake when we start weighing questions of opening the building? But what's the pain that we endure as we move through so much of this at a pace that people might think is slower than a slug's pace? You know, what pain must we endure? And then how do we support those who are experiencing loss? These are blue zone decisions. These aren't decisions that are emotional. They are decisions that come out of our deep sense of our, in Christian terms, of our deep sense of as being called as Christians to live out a certain set of values and principles in our mission. Thoughts at this point? We're kind of wrapping down. Maybe I'll just shift to the last slide, and we'll just use all of these as a way to kind of conclude our talk. And then how does all of this relate to Jesus's ministry and ours? So where are we as a church, both in COVID land, but also in transition in general? How do we move? Where does all of this, where does the rubber meet the road for us right now? So, you know, unmute yourself, jump in. Let's figure out where we're going.
In COVID land, I hear a lot of discussion, people griping perhaps about others not wearing masks and being out there and you know, clustering instead of distancing, and if we asked ourselves, well, what is our ministry? I think one would be that we would wear masks. It's the most Christian thing you could do, because you're keeping other people from getting whatever you might have. And the fact that there's so many not doing that merely speaks to me of the need for more of this kind of attitude of that we're belonging together, and that we've got to do this as one and not independently. So there's an awful lot of people out there that don't know that, apparently, don't know how even to do that, or why they would put something on that's uncomfortable and keeps them from smiling, that kind of thing. So how does all of this relate to our ministry and to Jesus? Well, it's not what would Jesus do, although it is, but it's what do we do as Christians to help others? And so as Christians and as an example to the neighborhood, one of the things we could do would be the absolute last place to open. So that's me.
Well, no, I think, you know, what you're talking about, you know, whether it's what would Jesus do or any of that, you know, just again, to riff off my sermon, to say, how do we glorify God? How is God glorified in what we do? Is God glorified in us opening too early so that people can be in the space and sing hymns? Is that glorifying God? Or is glorifying God being the last place that we open? where we know that we are safe. You know, so I think that you're absolutely, at least in terms of my sermon, right on track. Who else? Becky, you're unmuted.
Yeah, that picture that that you showed about the penguins reminded me of a book that I would commend to you. John Cotter is a well-known expert on organizations and a variety of things, but he wrote Who Moved My Cheese. Well, he didn't write it. Another person wrote Who Moved My Cheese, which many of you may know, but there's also another book called Our Iceberg is Melting. Why is this not functioning? Sorry, this isn't working. Oh, here we go. Can you see it now? I don't know what's wrong.
Well,
anyway, it's by John Cotter. It's called Our Iceberg is Melting, and it's an allegory about the iceberg's melting, but they don't want to admit it, and do they need to go find another place to live? And it always seems really appropriate to me in the work that I've done in the church, and in this case, especially with the pandemic. I think it gives people a common language to talk about it. Not only does Canoeing the Mountains also do that, but anyway, it reminded me of that. And then one other thing I wanted to say is that this idea of this people who are sabotaging whatever changes people are trying to implement, that comes from in many things, but one is we're really good at what we're doing now, at liturgy, music, and how we do things, right? And these changes will necessitate us to not do those things, or at least in the way that we're accustomed to doing them. So now we need to do them in a new way. And we're not sure that we can do it that way because it's a new way, and we'd rather do the wrong thing well than the new thing poorly, because nobody wants to look bad, right? And so there's actually a lot of studies that have proven this dynamic. So I think that to me is the Episcopal Church is a perfect example of that, wanting to do the wrong thing well because we know we're really good at it. And this new way of being, whatever, and we haven't figured out what that is, but when we do, we may not be very good at it. It's certainly not at the beginning, and no one wants to look foolish. So anyways, Our Iceberg is Melting is by John Cotter. I would highly recommend it. It's a very easy read, but it's super powerful.
Thanks. Karen.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just following up on Mary's point. I like this idea of maybe, because I get the missional part, but our mission field is physically not available to us right now. I physically can't go out and do my ministry in nursing homes because I can't go out there anymore. So I like this idea now that maybe our mission is to model Christian behavior. Maybe that's what we're being called to do right now. If we can't physically go into the mission field and do these things, maybe we need to step back and do the modeling of wearing masks, not opening our church and harming people, etc. So I like that idea. Thank you, Mary.
Deb, jump in.
There's more to it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
In that being, well, my cul-de-sac is my world right now. And, you know, there are people around me that are, you know, increasingly anxious or are suffering a great deal from the separation, but also from having tragedies occur in their families and then not being able to do things like attend a funeral or be at their loved one's sides. And we can, by our calm and our connectedness to one another and to God, model a way for them to get through all this. And that also gives us purpose. So,
Deb Sampson.
So way back in the mission statement thing, I was just playing around with missions, and one that is kind of my mission in life is seeking to be the face of God in our community. Riffing on that, it bothers me when we use red and blue because we politicized those colors. So that's just a statement. But I also wanted to say that sabotage is a sign that not everyone is feeling heard. and feeling that they're being brought along. Not everyone is in that feeling of safe zone. It was very interesting to me that when the Council of Churches, Adrian's a longtime friend of mine, Adrian posted something on Facebook, and my response was that I was really happy that the leadership of the Episcopal Church in Colorado cared about my safety. And I think in this time of COVID land, but in any time of change, it's important that people feel heard and feel that their safety in this change is important. And so sabotage is when that person is not feeling that they've been heard. I think that the people who are not wearing masks, who are wanting to go back to the way life was pre-COVID, are people who don't feel heard in all of the statements about wearing masks and maintaining safety being safer at home, and they're acting out, and that acting out is an indication that they've not felt that they've been brought along.
I think you're right, and I think that that's exactly, you know, what Bolsinger is saying. Stay calm, stay connected, and act relationally. Any last words from anybody? We've been at this for almost an hour. Need to duck out and see if anybody just wants to have a fun chat and coffee hour. Any last words that anybody would like to bring along? Next week, we will finish the book. It's the last 2 chapters, I think, of the book. And we will have a common language. Those of us who have been a part of this, which was what I had hoped for, was that it wasn't just a few people who knew what this was all about, but that the language had worked its way out into the wider congregation. So thank you all. I'm going to stop the share. The penguin's going to go away. And there we can see everybody again, or